There we go. Welcome to another episode of the Principal Liner Notes podcast. This is Sean Gaylord. This is episode 104, and I am so pleased and honored to have a musician, a pal, a bandmate that I have great respect and admiration for. And yes, we've got the guitar lined up. We have Tom Caufield here, guitarist, musician, poet, warrior, yeah, Titan of Tanglewood. All of the things, all of the bits here, and we're going to talk music. We are going to go down several rabbit holes on music and ideas and thoughts, and so this episode will serve as the liner notes, if you will, to let's just say these are the liner notes, Tom, to your latest album,
I like
Reverse the
that.
Polarity. And so when folks are listening to that album on the streaming platform of their choice, or when they go to your website, which we'll talk about here shortly, as they're listening to the album, well, maybe they can listen to a track and then they'll play this podcast and then play another track and then play the podcast and then have the liner notes, digitally speaking, as they listen to your work. But welcome, Tom.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I like what you're saying because you said recently when you were talking about your love of music, how much the liner notes used to mean. You could sit down and you were getting this great narrative at the time, just enriching the whole experience. So yeah, now I want to release a bonus version of the album where we've inserted these in, and it's a multimedia experience.
Which again, you and that's actually a great segue to some of your work, because as what I greatly appreciate is this kind of package that you put around your music. It is a multimedia experience, and you have a great appreciation for that. So when you go on Spotify, there's you can play whatever the track may be, and then there is a film or an image or a still that corresponds with your piece. I'd love for you to maybe talk about a little bit of some of those things that go into your music that kind of, if you will, bookend or enhance the experience.
Yeah, well, first I was a music fan, or am a music fan. And when records would come out, when they were good, when I was listening to records in the 70s and really first getting into music,
Mhm.
it always felt like a gift when a great record came out. I mean, it was like you were getting through the week, you were mowing the lawn, and your parents were bugging you to clean your room or whatnot, and suddenly something incredible like Close to the Edge by Yes comes out, or Steely Dan's Katie Lied or something, or Michael, especially something like Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, and boom, suddenly you've been handed something that just transforms you. And it's a lot more than just a piece of music that arrived in a blank cover. It's got an evocative title, and it's
Mhm.
based around kind of an idea with very interesting imagery. And so whenever I make a record, I think of that kind of gift that records used to feel like. And I want the experience to be somewhat, like suddenly there's something new and kind of evocative that can lift their whole week up, which some of these great
Mhm.
records did for me. So yeah, I think that because, being a human being, we have to spend so much of our energy just getting the business of getting through the day done, the logistics and the mechanics, when the truth is that 90% of our existence is a very poetic existence.
Mhm.
It's a spiritual existence, and it's wondering what the nature of creation is, where we're at in our lives. What is our, what are the relationships? What do things mean? What is our place in the world? And contemplating that, to me, is very enriching. And if you attach it to a tangible idea and then explore that, it kind of makes an inflection point that people can kind of hang on to, and then kind of get a sense of their place in relation to that and what they're going through. So yeah, that's something I always try to do.
So, what album or what piece of music, and we made a reference earlier in our pre-podcast conversation, which we probably just should have pressed record on immediately.
Right.
Um, but I kind of gave you the image. We talked about Van Morrison earlier,
Right.
how I have this image of you listening, a young Tom Caufield listening to Astral Weeks, that just pivotal 1968 album. And then you on this caravan, if you will, no pun, well, pun intended, completely for Van Morrison fans out there,
Right.
the song Caravan, and hearing that beautiful string arrangement at the end of the title track, which literally ascends, and then you going, I wonder where they're going. I wonder where those strings are going. Van, I'll see you later. I'm going to see what happens. And then I just see you kind of like floating away after a guitar, and then all of a sudden you start playing. So what was that moment for you that led you to the path where that guitar is in your hands right now?
Yeah, well, Astral Weeks was kind of a pivotal album. I first heard it at a later than when it first came out,
Mm-hmm.
but I had made one of my biggest leaps ever in life, which was a girlfriend of mine at the time, and I moved from Michigan, where I grew up, to Santa Cruz, California, and we only stayed about 9 months, but we were on our own, very little money, and we were living up in the Santa Cruz mountains, kind of the water, down the mountain road, and we had to stay in. We had to cook in a lot, and so I remember one of the 4 or 5 cassettes we had was Astral Weeks. We'd put it on, drink some wine, we'd make some dinner, we'd make some pasta with a filmmaker friend of mine, and then we'd head down to the ocean, and those melodies would be swarming in my head. And yeah, it was the first record I heard that was, as I understand it, was kind of an improvisational record to some extent. And so, for guys like, I had grew up with first hearing, well, my first musical experience was my mom kind of singing to me in the playpen. And I remember that before she would, I would feel a little bit of anxiety. And then she would sing. She sang Moon River and she sang August Moon. The air would just fill with this kind of positivity and safety. So I never know if music as something that was spiritual and that was kind of a comfort was something I loved because she did it, or because she responded to something that was already, hardwired in me. But whatever the reason, that was kind of the main way music first reached me. And then soon after, once again, kind of devotional music. I heard music at Christmas time. I heard in the hymns and the carols, and then I heard music in the church. So my first musical experience was music as kind of spiritual tributes or devotions, and sort of very peaceful and very, like you say about the Van Morrison record, very ascending, like hymns will do. And then this little group of guys from Liverpool, I don't know if you know about them, but they kind of changed things incredibly in the 60s, and we all kind of took some note of that. And sometimes I wonder, for as much as the Beatles influenced everybody and brought them joy, how many people they slightly confused, because we all just had to be the Beatles at that point, whether we were meant to or not. So, after spending a number of years loving the Beatles, they put out Rubber Soul. Now, Rubber Soul was the Beatles, but it had a sort of introspective nature. And that was what was kind of different about it from the records heretofore. And it was also, it leaned acoustic. And so it kind of showed me that spoke to me a little more. And it was a great gateway because it was Beatles which I adored for their melodic power and
Mhm.
their kind of social, the joy they brought on the cultural level, and the confidence and the camaraderie and the loyalty and the brotherhood. But they had this, suddenly here was a record that was looking inward, and it was
Mhm.
also it had a lot of space, and it was acoustic. And I just really love that. And so that's kind of the beginning of where I understood, or I should say, something was speaking to me personally in the way that I would want to pursue music. And then after that, if you kind of take a leap, a lot of the to the 70s, a lot of kind of progressive music was having a lot of acoustic and instrumental passages, and
Yeah.
particularly Tubular Bells was an inflection point for me, because
Mm.
here was a record that was 90% instrumental and very acoustic, and it was very it was long. They were long form pieces, and it was introspective music. So not only were you kind of going here, you were going into it, and it was making your mind travel. At the same time, it was kind of relaxing your body. It was mesmerizing. So and that was kind of where I started with instrumental music and acoustic music as its own thing.
That's amazing. And I just so happen to have a copy, as you know, of Rubber Soul here.
Right.
This is the American Capitol Records edition, which for me and for many other Beatle fans, and there are going to be some Beatle fans that I'm going to alienate here in just a second.
Right.
The
Yes.
American version, in my mind, is the better version.
I'm
It's
so glad you agree with me on that. You know who else agrees with that is apropos of nothing, but Tom Petty felt that way as well.
Oh wow, we are in very good company then.
Yeah.
Tom Petty, may he rest in peace. But it just, that acoustic introspective sound flows better. Now, sometimes Capitol Records didn't get it right in terms of the Beatles' original vision of how the songs were aligned on the album, and in some cases, songs were taken off the original album. But for an album to begin with, or the American version to begin with, I've just seen a face, and then
Oh,
to take you on this kind of folk introspective acoustic journey, it's just a great world. It's a great expedition to be upon. I also believe Brian Wilson, this was probably the version that he
I
heard,
think, yeah.
and then that set up, and he had the famous epiphany. Well, wow, this is an album in which all the songs just fit together and sound right. I'm going to make the greatest album ever made now. I'm going to set out to do that. Hence Pet Sounds. And we would not have had that masterpiece if it weren't for this masterpiece. So I appreciate your
Absolutely.
take on the album.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Pet Sounds also uses the kind of the brown cover, and
Yeah.
that has a lot of space. But yeah, the when I've just seen a face starts, that moment with the acoustic guitar and the way that it stays consistent through
Yes.
was a big influence for me. It's funny, a lot of times we uh, people will often say, "What was your biggest influence?" And you tend to want to say an album or an artist, but a lot of times an influence, I think, can just be a moment. And
Yeah.
with acoustic guitar, what I was picking up on a lot. We've been talking about Rubber Soul, and we went to instrumental music, but you had a lot of acoustic music starting in the early 70s as well.
Yes.
Yeah, you had James Taylor, you had John Denver, you all coming off this Rubber Soul kind of acoustic and the folk rock moment, and a
Hmm.
lot of just the guitar intros alone would ring in my mind, and I swear to this day they're primarily what I'm trying to recreate. Those would be things like the intro to Fire and Rain by
Oh,
James Taylor, just the
yes.
intro.
Yeah.
The intro to Ventura Highway by America,
Hmm.
just the solo guitar, the beautiful intro to Rocky Mountain High
Oh
by
yeah.
John. So they're little tiny ambient guitar moments in which then the voices come in. But yeah, you had David Lindley and Jackson Brown doing beautiful
Hmm.
acoustic guitar work. You had Jim Croce doing beautiful guitar work. So there was all kinds of acoustic music, kind of to draw from in those early folk rock and singer-songwriter days.
Absolutely. Or you have these acoustic moments, and you touched upon this in these kind of longer conceptual grand electronic pieces,
Wow.
i.e. yes, i.e. Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Yeah,
I'm thinking of Steve Howe, in
absolutely.
the middle of
Yeah.
these epics on any number of Yes songs, and then all of a sudden we have this kind of brief acoustic interlude. Jimmy Page, Led Zeppelin. There's that same sort of Celtic folk feel in a lot of those songs. Stairway to Heaven, of course, that iconic acoustic opening piece. So, I love how that form is played with these kind of moments,
Yeah.
which serve as these minor epiphanies or these minor movements or major movements depending on
Yeah, I
on
mean,
on the
Stairway to
piece.
Heaven. Yeah, a Stairway to Heaven, overplayed, but I love to wait. I love to find that moment where I've just stayed away from a record like that long enough that it sounds fresh again. And you put it on and you're reminded of why it was so popular because it's beautifully done.
Mhm.
Stairway to Heaven, I think it's almost a minute and a half before anybody sings. And
Yeah.
it's just the 12 string and he plays the tempo, the time, it's flawless playing, it's clean playing, it's recorded beautifully, and he plays straight through it, all the three sections that are going to come in the song, and then it's beautiful acoustic music. It's been preceded by the thing Evermore, where Sandy Denny's singing, where
Oh
they've got, I
yes.
think,
Oh.
mandolin. Yeah, it's amazing. But you were to Yes, for example, there's a long title track piece called Close to the Edge.
Hmm.
And in, in the middle of that piece, all the drums, all the guitar, all the voices just bottom out. They
Yep.
fade out. And there's a section where just a big open cavern just spreads out
Yes.
across the stereo image and it just hangs. No tempo.
Hmm.
For almost, I guess, 2 minutes. And that was the first time I heard what later became known as ambient music.
Hmm.
And I used to love that moment. And then a slow kind of Hammond organ tempo comes in, and then they do kind of an almost, I wouldn't call it a cappella because there is the texture and the tempo, but it's a choral, like a 3-part choral voice, and then
Hmm.
it starts to be contrapuntal. And this is ambient music in 1973, and then came Brian Eno and Music for Airports,
That's right.
uh, and Mike Oldfield's what I consider his superior follow up to Tubular Bells' third album, which is called Omadon. And I've covered a piece of that title track on an album of mine. So this was very acoustic, very ambient music in the very early 70s. And I was finding just a place in there where I could not only enjoy that sort of short phrase melody that I had sort of absorbed from the Beatles and came to love, but also this sort of literate and philosophical side that I had. And it was finding room to kind of play and kind of roam
Hmm.
in that kind of music. So yeah, so the 70s were fertile ground for this kind of acoustic, kind of introspective, contemplative stuff.
Absolutely. And now I want to go listen to Yes,
Yeah.
Close to the Edge, and that's going to be my homework assignment, for me, because that is an album, that does require deep listening and deep attention, and just based upon what you just said, like I'm going to go to that moment. Um, in your music, how would you, for those that may not be familiar and have not been to caufieldmusic.com, your website, your great website, by the way, or if they've not had the ability to see you live, and just real quickly, um my intro to you was experiencing you live at Be Kind Coffee right up the road here in our village of Clemmons, North Carolina.
Yes, wonderful
and
place.
and you were doing holiday music with Matt Kendrick, uh the great bass player, underrated musician, and somebody that I have been a long time fan of. And so when my wife and my father-in-law, who was staying with us, visiting with us, and my sister-in-law, we were going to Be Kind, and we saw, I said, oh man, Matt Kendrick, I know who he is. I don't know who this Tom Caufield guy is. I'm sure he's a nice guy. And then hearing your holiday music and sacred music, really, Matt's cool and all, and I'm a big fan, and hopefully he's tuning in. And I remember as a kid seeing him play in the Matt Kendrick unit here in Winston-Salem when I was waiting tables at Michael's restaurant. And then he played at the first school where I was principal of, where he was playing with doing like the history of North Carolina music. And I remember getting, I was so excited at his assembly, Tom. And I to get the school like quieted down, I grabbed the mic and I just started going, a love supreme, a love supreme. And then Matt just started playing the bass riff.
Wow, what a
And I
moment. That's
kind of
so
like
cool.
had this kind of fanboy moment. John Coltrane, of course,
Yeah.
being a native of High Point, North Carolina. But putting that rabbit hole aside, that was the intro to your music, and seeing you and hearing you and getting to know you. So for those who did not have that experience, or can't go to Be Kind Coffee, or go up to wherever you're playing, what is the first chapter that folks, or in media res, that folks need to get to introduce themselves to your world and your music?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me say real quick, just a shout out to Matt, because Matt is a great guy. And Matt has just been real big figure in my life. I've actually known him since right around 1989. And I
Wow.
was living in Winston for a few years then. He played bass on a record I made, and he just lifted it. He's a real exceptional player. I'll turn you on to that, and you just so you can hear him
I'd
play.
love to hear
And
that.
he and at the time I was playing it's kind of rock, pop rock music. I was a singer-songwriter. And but Matt has traveled with me into kind of my pepper moment, as you would say, where I decided that I needed to leave all the baggage behind. I've read your book and I love it.
Oh,
And
thank you. Thank
my
you.
pepper moment was kind of deciding I wanted to start again, start with a style of music where I could let kind of the history of what I'd been doing go and begin again. And I did, and it's worked out for me. I was, kind of playing pop rock and singer-songwriter for a number of years. That's when I met Matt. But I reached a point a little over a dozen years ago where I just wanted to do something different. And just kind of looking at the world, I felt that silence, or I should say quiet, was becoming a rare commodity. It was becoming kind of an endangered species. And everywhere, every experience I felt like I remembered you could get some quiet was now interrupted by a cell phone going off, or an alert, or there was just a noisier amount of junk mail coming in the box. And there was just a
Mhm.
harder sell across the board. It seemed like it was harder to just focus your attention span, whatnot. And kind of simultaneously, I wanted to just get back to my roots a little bit. My initial musical experience was in guitar lessons. And in the old days, you had those guys, even though you wanted to play the Beatles, you had those guys that would say, you know, if you're going to learn, you're going to learn it the right way. So they would make you go through like the scale, doing your scales for 3 weeks, or it's 3 months, you know, and then you had to learn very stuffy classical etudes and whatnot. And you just wanted to get to the chords of "I Want to Hold Your Hand."
Exactly.
I'll walk through fire to get to those chords, you know. But then kind of by accident, you start to kind of enjoy that stuff or admire it. And I had a great book, just kind of a simplified Andrus Segovia pieces was my lesson book. And I finally came to enjoy figuring those out. And they were beautifully composed little pieces. And so I wanted to get back to that. So I bought a classical guitar, and the minute I brought it home, I kind of got sick, and so I couldn't get to it, and I was laying in bed, and so when I finally did get over to it, I was almost so limp I could hardly play, but I started playing, and I was just playing very quietly, and I started to just because I was kind of, I think, fluish, I bypassed the kind of filter, you know, the cerebral filter, and I was just playing from emotion, from the heart, very quietly, very contemplatively. And I don't know if do you know the music, the Windham Hill style of music? Windham Hill,
Alex DeGrassi and
Will Ackerman,
Bill Ackerman, George Winston.
Yeah, it was a label that they put out, and it was Will Ackerman put a record out, and it sold so well, and he had a bunch of friends kind of doing the same thing, and they started putting out a beautiful series of instrumental contemplative music. So as an adjunct to the kind of ambient stuff I'd heard and the acoustic stuff I'd heard before, I was a fan of that. So I think I was drawing from all of that. And what I started doing was developing kind of a contemplative, quiet, acoustic guitar based approach to melodic music. And that's what I started doing. And this little guitar I bought, this nylon string guitar, just seemed to have songs in it. And I just started pouring songs out. And I had a little portable Tascam recorder, and I would put it in front of it, and I would limp through these pieces. And then I started to feel better. And so when I'd had about a dozen of them, I just rolled them together into my iTunes. And, you know, one day just around the house, getting things done, doing some work, I played them, and I just loved what I heard. I loved how quiet it was, but it was active enough to be engaging. It got my introspective mind going and my contemplative mind going, but it seemed to relax my outer nerves. And so I just loved it. I felt that it spoke better for me. My touch on the guitar spoke better for me than when I had sang or when I had written lyrics. So I wanted to go with it. So I made a record and I put it out, and I didn't know what would happen, but it was really well received in that community. One of the primary journalists wrote really a glowing review, and I got some airplay, and I was kind of off and running, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Oh, wow. Thank God you got the flu, right? And
right.
I mean,
it's one of those we'll see moments. Yeah.
Yeah. And how, and actually almost a Neil Young moment. You know, what's the famous story of him riding down by the river, Cinnamon Girl and Cowgirl in the sand, in bed with a fever. You know, so you are in good company with the flu and fever here when it comes to the artistic temperament. The notion of silence and contemplation is such a prevalent theme and resonance in your music. I find that, you know, and I've talked about this on the podcast, that music is this kind of universal divine voice that connects us, and regardless of what border or what box you check, or whatever it may be, music is that kind of is a unifying force, but is also a healing force. And how you are using music, which is a form of noise, to combat noise, and to diminish noise, is powerful. And so much of your playing is, I don't know, this isn't cliche, but it is soulful. It is soul music, not in the Brooke Benton, Marvin Gaye, Motown sense, but it is music that I believe that when I've heard and seen you play, it emanates from your soul. It is you establishing connection. It's you sharing what's on your mind, and I mean, and I hear that throughout all of your albums.
That's such a compliment. Thank you, Sean. Yeah, it's very emotional for me. It comes. I sit down to write when I'm feeling very emotional, and then I just follow it instinctually. But I loved hearing what you said yesterday on the podcast, what you just quoted about music being that kind of that enlightening force. And with me, back to the idea of silence, I think that when you talk about silencing the noise, it's because there's a chaos a lot of times to actual just room silence. And I think the chaos comes from our internal chatter. We're forced to deal with a lot in the modern world, especially this technological world and this fast world. I think it's probably been the case for a long time. If you read Montaigne, or people's minds, the human mind just runs and chatters with all its conflicting values, trying to reconcile all these conflicting values. And it can be chaotic. And if you have quiet music, for me anyway, if you have music that is quiet, but it has structure, and that's what I like about the sort of what I learned. I was fortunate enough to be born in the 60s, where the fashion at the time was these short, concise, melodic phrases, which is what I think the Beatles spearheaded, and what their main contribution was to me. I always still, even though I'm making quiet music, I think in those short, concise, melodic phrases. And I think why that gives me satisfaction is it's quiet, but it's putting nice little gestures of structure into the air. So it stops all those wild, the inner dialogue from spilling outside the lines everywhere, and kind of it starts to structure them and encourage me to think in more coherent forms. And the music is so relaxing, it's kind of quieted that part of me down. And that's why, for me, also, I listen to quiet music when I write, or when I'm writing, or when I'm reading, or when I'm just trying to get centered. And Brian Eno, when he talks about quiet music, and I think contemplative music, or that kind of instrumental music, is great because it is a nice background music. You can't ignore it. It can just set a nice mood. Whereas there's some music that's great, but you have to pay attention, and there's a lot happening. And if you try to tune it out, it's going to be very noisy in the air. But this kind of music can be very suitable for a background. Yet, hopefully, if you've done it in a way where you've been conscious and you're expressing your actual thoughts and emotions, it also will reward a close listen. So you can kind of toggle back and forth between it that way. Feel that the city is kind of looming nearby. And we were just, we built up a reserve of just a need to get back around the rhythms of the natural world. And we knew, we came we came back to Carolina because our mothers are both here and we wanted to be closer to them. They're both getting a little on.
Sure.
So my sister was helping us get an apartment, and Rebecca had loved Tanglewood when we visited, and she would just gently say, I hope we can be nearby or whatnot. So we kept that in mind when we looked for a place. And where I live now in Clemmons, Tanglewood's just about 1.5 miles away. And if Tanglewood was not there, the experience would be so different. We go there I think every day, if not 6 days a week. And it is just a cathedral. It is an absolute spiritual experience every time we go. I think a lot of people know that there's horse stables there, and there's a golf course there, which we've never really been on the golf course, but there's also trails right in the main part of the park.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if everybody knows that in the very back of the park, there are nature trails where you can go down and off into dirt track trails and into open fields. And if you are quiet enough and you just breathe and, just sort of embrace the place, every time is different. You can approach the paths from different directions, and you just always see things you haven't seen before. You see animals, you see it's funny, I never really realized how much, say, fall and winter change almost daily. I always thought they were just one thing a piece, but fall on Monday in October or November is different from fall on Thursday. Suddenly things have changed. And if you feel like you want to feel that you're connecting, or you're losing your connection by dealing with the man-made world, or you just want to keep bolstering your connection to the real world. I just don't think there's a better way than being around the natural world, because it's an indisputable language. I mean, this is the way it was made, that the world is designed. And when you watch the interplay, the light and the shadow, the loud and the quiet, the liquid and the solid, and how they change and how the interplay acts, and that I think the body feels so at home in that, and that it is home there, that it's educational, it's restorative, and it's centering, and all those things. So Tanglewood means so much to us here. It's hard to overstate.
No, absolutely. It is, hopefully the folks from the county that are listening and tuning in decide to give you, based upon that picture that you just painted of Tanglewood, you deserve a lifetime free pass to Tanglewood.
I wish they would give it to us. Yeah, well, I did get a grant this year from.
That's right.
I got from the North Carolina Arts Council. I think they're in cooperation with Arts Council Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, and Arts Greensboro. And that's kind of what I told them. I told them about, in my application, I just told them about how inspiring Tangle was to me, and that it's the primary influence behind the kind of tone of the music I've been making, which is on one of the levels it works on is to try to emulate that slow evolving kind of changing, cycling, always the same, always changing characteristic of the nature I see in Tanglewood. And I guess they liked what they read, because they went ahead and gave me a grant that'll help me make sure that the next record has a lot of high quality to it. So that was a real vote of confidence that meant a lot to me.
Yes, congratulations on that grant, and it is a very prestigious grant, and I look forward to the fruits of your labor that are going to come from that. Yeah. And if you need somebody to write some liner notes, I'm your guy, man. So
that I'm going to take you up on that.
Please, I'm dead serious
right now.
Yeah, that is a done deal, and there is no. All of you are listening, witness, and no charge or whatever. I just want to have the honor to to do that. And because I love liner notes and I love your music. And Tanglewood is worth a stroll for those of you that live nearby. It is one of those gifts that
Absolutely.
we have here in the Winston-Salem, Clemmons, Forsyth County area, and there's a lot of Tom just kind of beautifully painted a picture there that I think is worth your time for some silence or for your family to have a picnic or just a quiet contemplative walk, i.e. Thoreau, i.e. Hawthorne, i.e. Emerson.
Don Muir. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, Tom.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't. Tanglewood is a treasure in this town. They have a great pool with a lazy river.
That's
Uh,
right.
they have stables. They have trail rides. They have riding lessons. And there's a lot of venues there. They have a bed and breakfast there. I don't know if people know what a treasure this place is. They have a lot of just paved paths that are just all like booming cathedrals, where you're walking with under canopies of beautiful trees. There's a manicured garden behind the uh, manor house that has just most of the plants are labeled. It's curated. Oh my gosh, they have so many. You should see. You walk and groundskeepers have made. There's one that's like a little amphitheater that seats like 10 people. I could just sit down with my guitar there. They've got a little stone bench and then
That's
a
right.
little set of like it looks like the Roman Colosseum for 8 people or something, out there in the middle of the woods. And
Well,
you can't beat it. It's great
no, you
stuff.
can't, man. And I'm thinking when your album is completed, we need to have a
An 8 people concert. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And we'll do it there at Tanglewood
Yeah.
and have like live performance and yeah, oh, I'm already dreaming of the event here. So
Very cool. Well, I mean, they also have like they have I can't remember all the names, but one of them is called the Barn, which is just a beautiful. I think a lot of people will do businesses will do retreats or they'll have wedding after the wedding receptions there and whatnot. And that's a beautiful venue. They also have there's another one right near where the trails start. Anyway, yeah, I might try to do a little bit bigger of a release party, but we'll see. If not, we'll be out there on the 8 people seats, and then we'll do something intimate.
yeah, that'll be great, man. We'll
Yeah.
get Be Kind Coffee to cater. And
Cater. Yes,
that'll be
absolutely.
great. But it is a beautiful, beautiful place and a big fixture of my life and my childhood. Um, Speaking of albums, the album Tom's latest, my friends, is Reversing the Polarity, subtitled Pieces 167 through 175. He's holding it up now. It is all of Tom's work is a work of art and a mini masterpiece, and this episode will serve as the liner notes for that album, and you can order that album directly from Tom on his website, caufieldmusic.com. Please be sure to bookmark that page, sign up for his newsletter, which I greatly appreciate the artistry and the philosophy and the sharing of what you're reading or what you're listening to at that time. He puts a lot of depth and soul into that newsletter, as he does into his music. Now, real quickly, we mentioned Rubber Soul, and you did some quick free association with that. I also mentioned earlier, your homework, Tom, is to listen to Super Session,
Will
uh,
do.
featuring Mike Bloomfield, Al Cooper, and Stephen Stills, and not just for the music, but some of my favorite, what we were talking about, liner notes, and how when you listen to an album, there's this kind of world that you go into, and you look at the pictures and you go, well, what's that hat Steven Stills is wearing, and
Right.
who's this guy Michael Thomas, and what's he writing about, and who plays on what song. So highly recommend that. You and I
Yeah,
are big fans of Bob Dylan's "Time Out of Mind" album, which is just going through a reissue. So I would love to hear your take on this masterpiece.
absolutely. Here's my take on that. Okay, people think of Bob Dylan, they say, like a Rolling Stone, blowing in the wind, times are changing. This is pinnacle stuff. This is the mountain. Well, I say this was all just an apprenticeship while Bob Dylan warmed up to make this album. That's my take on Time Out of Mind. I think it's one of the greatest records ever made.
Agreed.
And here's what I mean by that a little bit. Of course, that early stuff is good stuff. But Bob Dylan was always, he had a high standard and he loved all the early rock and roll records and even like the pre-rock and roll records. He loved how they sounded. He loved the vibe of them. He loved the grain and the authenticity in the vocals. He loved the old bluesman. His who he loved the most was Little Richard.
That's
So
right.
he kind of you could say stumbled into making folk, and then he started folk rock. I'm a person that always loved Bob Dylan, but will somewhat sheepishly admit to being a little bit in the old days in the group of people that struggled with his voice just a little bit.
Yeah.
It was a little high and reedy for me and a little keening, although I could hear the great lyrics, the great, etc. But Bob Dylan kind of hung back for a while, got lost in the weeds. And when he came back with this record, a lot had changed. Number one, he'd written one of the best groups of songs he'd ever written. This is Lead Belly meets Shakespeare in these lyrics. I mean, this is blues, pain, mortality, heartbreak mixed with astonishingly philosophical and poetic insight, all said in a very accessible, plain spoken way. Astonishing. He got together with a producer named Daniel Lanois, who
Yes.
Daniel Lanois's MO is to buy up all the old beat up great ribbon microphones he can, all the old analog tube amps, and get not only that old sound, but almost a better capture of the old 40s and 50s sound, which has so much space, so much vibe, so much grit. And it's almost like you're walking in and seeing Howlin' Wolf in a club. People talk about Daniel Lanois' sound being somewhat affected. I tend to disagree. I think it recreates a naturalism, but the way I used to hear old R&B bands and bands on the Chitlin circuit and blues bands and whatnot in the clubs in the 70s and whatnot. And you walk in and nothing sounds kind of nice and clean. Those are always kind of chunky, and some instruments are louder than others, and it's kind of echoey and it's kind of murky. And that's what he creates. And if that's not enough, this retrospective that just came out actually improves on it, which is astounding. Because Dylan had always said about that record, he was a little bit disappointed with the mix. And I thought, oh, he's just being Bob Dylan. He's being a little ornery. But I think there were some better versions hiding in there that it took them a few years to find. So that record to me is the mountain, and I love it. And then he went on to do a string of records that are also very good. So his Dylan late period for me is one of the great musical events. I know a lot of people probably checked out on Bob Dylan, and he's just, they know he's busy, but they don't know what he's doing. But if you can, check out late Bob Dylan, starting with the records he made in '97.
I 100% agree with you. To me, this is the best album he ever did. And as much as I appreciate, like a Rolling Stone, Blonde on Blonde, Blood on the Tracks, those periods, those albums, to me, I love how you framed it. Those albums were the apprenticeship to this Mount Everest of an album. And this latter day Bob Dylan, because after this he does just a string of just
Love
Love
and
and
Theft,
Theft.
Modern Times, and it's got so much gravitas, and it's
Yes.
and he's his voice is, what is it, dropped almost an octave or something, and and it's so lived in, and it's so poetic. It's just really something.
I can see you down the line, and maybe after the next album, I can, and we I just want to plant a seed here. But I can see a Tom Caufield cover of Not Dark Yet.
Oh,
I can see you doing something with several tracks of this album. Um, but and Daniel Lanois, underrated producer. I mean, he is most famous for his work with U2 and Brian Eno. They were co-producers together on my favorite U2 album, The Unforgettable Fire. Um,
great album.
and then Lanois' solo work, Acadia.
It
That
is amazing.
album.
Yeah.
Oh, oh, man. But this album is amazing. Um, you touched upon in our conversation in this episode on instrumental music. We talked a little bit about this at the kind of the pre conversation. And I said that I would be remiss. I have a instrumentalist, guitarist, instrumentalist, and we I would be remiss if we did not talk about Classical Gas from
Right.
Mason Williams' phonograph record. Again, another fun little album with liner notes. And I love how they list all the musicians, all the folks from the Wrecking Crew from LA. Um, what's your take on Mason Williams and Classical Gas, guitarist to guitarist?
Well, it's quite a feat. At the time, it was kind of a one-off. And yeah, so in the 60s, there was the golden age of AM radio, and
Yes.
the Beatles were the big bang. And suddenly there was, the great thing about AM radio in the 60s was how eclectic it was. And this is kind of the standard read on it now, but I don't know if younger folks know. I mean, what was beautiful about it was how eclectic it was. It was playing soul music, it was playing funk music, it was playing folk, it was playing kind of easy listening. Sinatra was still on the charts. It was playing Baroque pop. It was playing novelty songs. It was playing country, Harper Valley PTA,
Yes.
uh, Jerry Reed. If you're hot, you're not. If you're hot, you're hot. If you're not, you're not. It was playing Winchester Cathedral and strange, what would they be called? Music hall. It was amazing, you know. So it was kind of like, from a social perspective, it was the ideal of the multicultural, sort of ideal or something, which was
Mm.
beautiful. That's kind of how I grew up. But yeah, all of a sudden you'd hear instrumental pieces of music. Booker T and the MGs were doing "Hang 'Em High" and the Good,
Mhm.
Bad, and the Ugly, Green Onions, whatnot. You had Roger Williams doing a piano version of "Born Free,"
Mm.
theme from a movie, and then Classical Gas comes out, and it's kind of got a backbeat, and it's kind of almost Beethoven meets like Jimmy Webb doing
Yeah.
Galveston or something. But as all us guitar players found it, the fretwork was quite impressive, and I think almost every guitar player took a crack at it at the time. And but once again, for me, it was always almost striking, almost a little bit bold to hear a piece of music without vocals, because it just opened up for you and let you kind of project onto it. But yeah, one of the great instrumental hits of the 60s, of which there weren't many, but they counted.
We can't dismiss the cinematic nature of instrumental music, and we kind of began with talking about multimedia and the mixing and merging
Right.
of expression. So when you do listen to an album, such as this and Classical Gas, you've got very much and Mason Williams, very much like you, a Renaissance man. One who Mason Williams is a writer, he's an actor, musician. He did all kinds of art happenings, in the '60s, and some of that is in your work. So when I go on Spotify and pull up your music, there's very much an appreciation not only for the audio world, but also for the video and stills that you put through that. So on your latest album, Reversing the Polarity, what is that experience that you want the listener to come away with? Because it's a whole package, and it's a great package. But what is that gift that you are attempting to give to listeners through your latest album?
Well, I hope that it's transforming. I hope that it carves out a kind of quiet space where they can detox a little of this kind of noise chatter that we've got going on so much in this. I guess it's just the early social media era. I think it's transitioning. I think right now I think it's a bit of an imposition on us as people in our rhythms. I know that right here, right now, we're using social media to positive advantage, and I think that's a good thing. But I think it's also got a side of it that we're still struggling to tame. And so I'm trying to make a, an easily accessible and very obvious way to carve out an hour of quiet on a Saturday morning when you take a break from the work week. You're going to make your coffee, and you can maybe put something on that'll silence a little bit of that chatter. And it's going to be calming, but it's going to have enough structure that it's going to not shut your thoughts down and put you back to sleep, but it'll kind of engage your what's going on in your life, maybe help you focus it, maybe help you prioritize it. That's what I struggle with a lot, is just remembering what the real point of life is, which is to celebrate the more beautiful sides of it, the deeper sides, just the miracle that we're all here, and that we're living a miraculous thing out, which is to be a living creature. It's literally, if we were sane, we'd be astonished by that every hour of every day, because it's crazy.
Yeah.
And I also struggle with priorities. My typical to-do list has 35 things on it every morning. And at the end of every day, I've gotten to about 4 of them. So I have to spend some time prioritizing. So a big thing for me is to kind of get centered in the morning. And I like to do it with music. I did want to mention another big influence of mine was a guy named Tim Story. He was a guy who started making music in the very late 70s and 80s. And he lived in Maumee, Ohio, which was where I was born. And I happened to meet him through a friend of a friend. And he makes a beautiful kind of contemplative instrumental music that's been a big influence on me. So I put on things like Will Ackerman or Tim Story, and I want to give that to the listen, the person that happens upon my record. And then just quickly in closing, what's unique about this album is I generally work in 3 ways: a solo nylon string, solo steel string, and then acoustic guitar that's accompanied by sustaining instruments, textures, cellos, and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And this record, for the first time, taking a cue out of from the Beatles' White Album, who so confident in the fingerprint of their personal style, could be as eclectic as, say, Paul McCartney was on the White Album, where he can go from the rock and roll of back in the USR to the crazy avant-garde of Wild Honey Pie, to the Baroque pop of Martha, My Dear, to the folk ballad of Blackbird, to the down and dirty blues of Why Don't We Do It in the Road. But it's all Paul McCartney. You always know you're with Paul McCartney. I think that's an amazing thing. He can change genre, but maintain his style. So on this record, I said, okay, for the first time, I'm going to do the 3 things I do. So it starts with steel string. It transitions to textures, and it finishes with nylon string. So I hope you feel like you've kind of traveled somewhere, because in a way that's what we do. Like when they say you never stand in the same river twice, and an hour's gone by and you're still yourself, but you've perhaps moved a bit, which I think is what time does with us. And so I took a little shot at that with this album, and you don't stay in that same place where when I usually use the same approach all through an album, but I think my style was strong enough to keep you in that sort of relaxed but engaged place in the way I do it, but travel a little bit.
I dig that, man. It is very much of the 60s, with music taking you on a journey. And the late great Peter Tork from the Monkees talked about how albums at that time, and when the Monkees became a musical unit, a band, that it was about taking a trip, not in the psychedelic sense, but it really was the attempt for a lot of those musicians at the time was to take you from point A to point B, and in that journey, you were invited to learn something about yourself, and I see that, just as you explain that album, your latest album, Reversing the Polarity, it very much is a trip. It's a trip where, all right, we're going to start at A, we're going to end at B, or maybe we'll go to C, and maybe you'll get to B, and I'll see you there. And very much a great progression, starting with the opening track, Swaying Grass of Summer, which again is just so poetic, man. And then probably my favorite song on the album, the closing, Essay in Calm. And as a former high school English teacher who assigned essays and taught the essay, I greatly appreciate that title. Again, Reversing the Polarity, Tom Caufield. You can find it on your favorite streaming service. If you go to caufieldmusic.com, Tom has a great link where it will lead you on a trip to finding, the platform of your choice, or you can order the CD directly from Tom. Tom, any gigs coming up? Anything that you want to plug for future performances coming up for those in wherever area, whatever part of the world, to see you live?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I play every Saturday when the weather permits at the wonderful Be Kind Coffee here in Clemmons. Be
Mhm.
Kind Coffee, if you don't know about it, it's a coffee shop here in Clemmons. It's a wonderful place. It's very dog friendly. They've got a patio out front, and the greatest people, just the nicest people. And it's always a great Saturday. There's a lot of dogs out. You make new friends, or you can just sit by yourself with your laptop. You can be inside, you can be outside. So I saw on the weather report it's going to be warm next week. So it probably won't be on Saturday, but I'll be out there on one of the weekdays. Call ahead, maybe check. But yeah, once it's warm in May and whatnot, I'm usually there all the way through the summer. But beyond that, I'm foregoing any live performances because I'm really going to concentrate on the Grant album. So that's where my focus is going to be. And so once again, want to shout out to North Carolina Council of the Arts, for Forsyth County, Winston-Salem Arts, and Arts Greensboro for the generous grant. And that's where my focus is going to be.
Wonderful. And those are great focuses to have. And Be Kind Coffee is, I mean, it's the best coffee in town. It is a very good vibe and positive and an inviting place. And when you play there, you accentuate the vibe that is there, and literally 5 minutes away from my house. So I look forward to seeing you there, and also look forward to the roughly named Grant album, and looking forward to the fruits of that labor. And I'm all right. Those liner notes for you, pal.
Well, I have a working title. I don't know if it'll stick, but the
Okay.
working title took me a while. But the working title is "All Days Shining."
All Days Shining.
Yeah,
Like it.
all days, plural. All days shining. That's my working title.
Okay.
If it sticks. Yeah.
We'll see where the music takes you, man. Tom, I am we could go another few hours and make this a quadruple yes concept album of a podcast episode. But
Oh, I'm telling you, we could, Sean. We didn't even get to the Beatles trivia cards I had handpicked to see if I
oh,
could stump you. We
bring
didn't.
it. Let's do
Oh,
it.
you want to try one?
Let's
I want to.
I'll try one. Let's do
Well,
it.
when I didn't know how Trivial Pursuit worked. Maybe, if you do, you know. If you don't, it's levels of difficulty, which is cool. So Sean and me are frightening. There's expert, there's
Yes.
beginner, then there's frightening. Back
Right.
away slowly level. We're those kind of guys. And so I wanted to try Sean. I was going to throw him the softball, and then I was going to take him into the Netherland of where was Ringo on August 14, 1961 for 10 minutes when he was trying to pick out the right color of carpet for his mother's house type stuff. So we'll see what Sean knows. So let's see.
Bring
What do
it,
we got
Tom.
here? Okay, I got to start. Okay, which Beatles single has a beautiful three-part harmony and a request not to wear red?
Oh, yes, it is.
Yes, it is one of my favorite. There's a contemplative Beatles song, and when I go back, it's always those kind of ambient Beatles songs I love the most. Yes, it is This Boy, and I Love Her If I Fell.
Mhm.
But not, you got it. Okay, so you're 1 for 1.
Beautiful
Okay,
song.
yeah. Okay, let's see. Who designed the pen and ink drawing photo collage that graces the cover of Revolver?
Oh, one of my favorite human beings. And in fact, I wrote a piece about him about a year or so ago for Culture Sonar. And if I'm not mistaken, this individual, um, several things about Klaus Vormann. One,
Correct.
he knew the Beatles when they were in Germany. He was dating Astrid Kirchner, who then later got up with Stu Sutcliffe, the original bass player for the Beatles, and Klaus was that guy that I think when Stu left the band, he went up to John Lennon and said, "Hey, I've learned bass? Can I play with you? Can I join the Beatles?" And John said to him,
Yeah.
"We've already got a bass player. Paul's playing bass now." But really,
Yeah.
yeah, wow.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he then went on to play bass for Manfred Mann, and then played bass on a lot of their seminal solo albums. He's on the Plastic Ono Band album with John Lennon. He's on All Things Must Pass with George. He pretty much played on Ringo's a lot of Ringo stuff. But I have great respect for Klaus Vormann, and he won the Grammy for best
Oh,
album cover for Revolver for that album.
uh, yeah, isn't it? No matter how many times I read the story, can you imagine being Klaus Vormann and Astrid Kutcher and walking into
Yes,
the cat wherever they were, the cast, whichever one they went into, the Star Club, and you just sit down and say, "What have we here?" And I mean,
exactly.
before anybody had seen it, that's just such an amazing thing to think about. And then what they witnessed, from that front row seat must have just been an amazing experience.
I put him in the category, both of them in the category as like the first Beatle maniacs. Like they were the first fans that like truly got
They
it.
got it. They
Literally
got
stumbling into that club in Hamburg and going,
Yeah.
"Whoa, this is something,"
Yes.
Um,
And the Beatles story is interesting in the sense that Paul and John finally made their legend and their reputation and their immortality as songwriters. I mean, we know they're the Beatles, the
mhm.
voices were great, the playing was great, but the great songs. But everybody saw something in them before the songs. Even George Martin did. They saw it before all the songs. They said, there's something about these guys. And my best friend years ago said, it's so great that they did have what everybody saw in them, when we didn't know if they did, but they did. It was there. They proved it. They backed it up, which is a great thing.
Good
Um,
point.
What else do we have? Okay, let's see now. The level of difficulty is accelerating, my friend. So, okay, in the movie Help, what does Clang use in an attempt to remove Ringo's ring in the recording studio basement?
I believe, if I'm thinking back to that crazy movie, some version of a chainsaw or a saw.
It's a chainsaw. It's a
Okay,
chainsaw. Okay, let's move quickly. Staying on the movie idea. The movie Son of Dracula stars Harry Nilsson and which Beatle?
Ringo Starr.
You got it. All right, now it's going to get a little crazy.
All right, let's bring it.
Okay, what are the two different religious chants heard in George's recording of My Sweet Lord?
Okay, good question. Great song. Featuring Klaus Vormann on bass, if I'm not mistaken.
No.
I love that song, My Sweet Lord. I love that album, All Things Must Pass. So if I'm not mistaken, Hari Krishna
Right.
is there. Hari Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. And then the second one, you may have stumped me, but I'm gonna make an attempt. I'm going to make an attempt. Hari Krishna and some, and I'm gonna probably mess up the pronunciation, but something like Hari Rama, something with Rama
To
in
me,
it.
well, the answer says hallelujah. And now I remember them saying hallelujah, but it doesn't sound like it's the melody of Handel's hallelujah. So,
Yeah, it's
I don't,
Hallelujah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
So,
okay.
I don't know.
You,
Anyway, so
oh,
I give it to you,
nah, nah, nah. You
So,
got me on that one, man.
all right, the last one. And I think you'll get this. There's another partial, I think. Okay, here we go. What was the name of Alan Williams' club, which was a frequent hangout of the future Beatles in 1960?
Okay, Alan Williams, infamously the man who gave the Beatles away their first manager.
Right.
Um, I'm gonna go out on a limb here. It wasn't the Cavern. It was not the Casbah Club.
Nope.
It wasn't the Kaiser Keller. It wasn't the top 10. I'm gonna.
It's in Liverpool. It's
It
not
is
in
in Liverpool.
Germany.
Was it Ye Crack?
No, it was right at, let me see if I can jog your memory. So it's right after the place that was in Pete Best's mom's basement, which was that the Casbah? I
That
can't
was the
remember.
Casbah Club. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's right after that. They before they went to Hamburg.
Okay. Yes, I should know this. Not
Oh,
Ye
it's a
Crap. Wasn't the something grapes?
no. It was the Jacaranda.
The Jackpot. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. You
This
got
need,
you
this is
got
need
me.
to know stuff. Yes.
That's important. The Jacaranda Club. Yes.
Yeah.
That
Well,
is
nice
good.
job. Yeah.
But thank you. Yeah, that was a good question. Those were good questions.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
You're the only, I'll tell you, I've owned this game like 10 years. You're the only other person that we're gonna have to meet at Be Kind Coffee
Yes.
and at least carve out an hour and see where we can take it. So
Absolutely. In between sets, we'll do that. That was great fun. I am so grateful for that. And I'm sure that the folks who are listening who are at that frightening Beatles level that we we're going Jacaranda show, Jack,
Yeah.
so
Well, you do a great thing, which is you make very, very with a lot of wit and without being pretentious at all. You make the Beatles a reference point for life lessons in your great book, The Pepper Effect, and in a lot of your podcasts. And it's a great thing, because if you were, I wondered about this, and I read in the book that you came to the Beatles a little later, and that's so interesting because to me that they could still have that very life-changing effect even to someone that didn't wasn't born into them, that it carried. But yeah, if you grew up with the Beatles, it's hard to, if for someone that wasn't there, it's hard to convey how all encompassing their effect was.
Mhm.
They were a very powerful force that really helped define the era. And they are almost just a mountain. You can refer back to them, and the way you take their history and make lessons and comparisons to modern life was really a stroke of genius. I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm very honored by that, Tom. You are the better artist, and I'm grateful for that, and honored that you read The Pepper Effect. A lot of love in that book, and like I often refer to it, it's my love letter to the Beatles and education and the world. It's really just a large thank you note to those four lads from Liverpool who have given me and us so much. And as a nod to my great friend, another musician friend, Chris Fisher, who often would jest with me when we were in college together that I was not born at the time of the Beatles when they were together, and he's a year, roughly a little close to a year older than me. So he was born in '69, and he often says, the Beatles were together when I was alive. They weren't when you were around. And I technically say, well, Chris, and if I hope he's listening, I was born on May 8th, 1970, the exact day that the final Beatles album, studio album, Let It Be, was released.
Wow.
So
God, so
I
cool.
just made it. I just made it. Now, technically, they, probably had been broken up, but
Oh, I
but
love the symmetry of that. I'm glad you get to carry that with you. Hey,
yes,
speaking of symmetry, I wanted to tell you, going back to the beginning. So we had our podcast scheduled, and you were marching along through the episodes and being somewhat silly about some of these things. I started wondering. So I wonder what episode, my episode will be, and what if the number will have any significance. So
yeah,
you had Liz Bostwick, and I watched it, and she was 102, and I thought, okay, great. Well, I'll be 103. That's great. That's a cool number. And then you did the impromptu podcast yesterday,
I
and I
did.
celebrated because that made this one 104. And there were two numbers Rebecca and I were always associated with during our 25 years in Los Angeles. The first one was 420, which we didn't know the meaning of, but we lived in a town called Playa del Rey, and people would say, "Where are you at in Playa?" We'd say, "We're right off, Culver. We're right at 420," and everybody would chuckle, and we'd say, "What's funny about that?" Then there were, on April 20th, a lot of the times people would knock on our door. You do know what 420
I
is,
do.
right?
Yeah, I
Yeah, yeah.
do. Yeah.
Well, we didn't. And people would knock on our door with little pipes in their hand and whatnot and say, "Why don't you come out and join us?" And we'd say, "What's going on here?" Then we found out. But then we lived in Brentwood for 10 years, and we'd often say, "Meet us at 104," because 104 was our apartment number address there. So I was really glad that it was episode 104. So that's one of our big,
Oh, that's great.
yeah.
So that's really I am a big fan of those kinds of fateful connections and I know the Beatles, the number nine, or for John Lennon in particular, number nine is a particularly important number. So I am completely pleased that this is 104 for
Yeah.
you and Rebecca. So another enhancement of that
Serendipity.
connection, man. That is great serendipity, man. So, oh man, we'll put that in bronze for you. We'll have to make a special T-shirt or something. That is so cool. So this is episode 104. This is Tom Caufield with Sean Gaylord here on the Principal Liner Notes podcast. Tom, thank you so much for the gift of your time and your insight and your artistry in here on the Liner Notes podcast for episode 104. Again, for those of you that are listening, please follow Tom on Instagram at Tom Caufield. You can also bookmark his website, caufieldmusic.com. And there you can find his links to his latest album, Reversing the Polarity, or you can also find all of his other. He is a very prolific composer and guitarist, and you can find many albums, and a great kind of starting point, if you don't want to listen to the latest album, which I do recommend, is his Spotify playlist. This is Tom Caufield, which is a great sampling of his canon and his work. And of course, on a nice day, go to Be Kind Coffee in Clemmons, North Carolina, and hear him live. And maybe you'll see me there, and I'll save you a seat, and you can join us in a game of Beatles Trivial Pursuit.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. It's been an honor for you to ask me on, and I really enjoyed it. So thanks.
Thank you, Tom. As always, my friends on the Principal Liner Notes podcast, don't forget to share with the world your gifts, your strengths, and your artistry. We all have a masterpiece within us, and you help make the world a better place by sharing those gifts. There is a flip side to every album, and I hope to catch you there, and I know Tom will be there as well. Please take an hour to listen to his music and to tune into his world, and to tune into your own world, and to appreciate the silence and the beauty that is within all of us. This is Principal Liner Notes podcast, episode 104, proudly episode 104 for Tom and Rebecca. Thanks again. We'll catch you there. Peace.